كلام في التصميم هو بودكاست من تقديم ليوان يستكشف مواضيع التصميم المعاصر في الشرق الأوسط وخارجه، ويربط أصوات المصممين المبدعين المحليين مع العالميين لتشجيع التعاون ومناقشة الأمور الإبداعية والثقافية والفكرية.
Talks on Design podcast by Liwan explores contemporary design themes across the Middle East and beyond. Featuring pioneering Qatari creators, the podcast connects local and global design voices and encourages collaboration and commentary on creative, cultural, and intellectual matters.
Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to dive into our discussion under the theme of design and resilience. In this conversation, we'll take a closer look at crops, agriculture, the ecology of Qatar, and new and old relationships between the community and the land. So firstly, thank you so much to our guests today for joining us. Starting off with introducing Dr. Aspa. Dr. Aspa is a researcher, ecologist, and consultant on natural conservation and restoration, and she currently works on restoration programs in arid climates in Qatar. Also joining us is His Excellency Fahad Attiyah, who has had a long and distinguished career as a government legal counsel, food security planner, and diplomat for the state of Qatar. He is also the founder of Hinat Salma, a sustainable, eco-conscious farm in Qatar. Thank you, Dr. Aspa and Fahad, for joining us today. Just to sort of go over the introductions, Dr. Aspa, if you could start with an introduction of yourself, your work as an ecologist in Qatar, and what does it mean to be working in this region?
Thank you, Arshee. And let me say my thank yous to all of you, first of all, to you for the wonderful time that we have had the past month since the springtime, and to your head of programs, Khalid Ali, and to Jenna Berbick, the head of communications and editor of the Al Journal. And a huge thank you to Fahad, not only for agreeing to be in discussion with me today, but for always welcoming me to the farm, bringing me in for some of the decision-making that has to do with the ecology pillar in his farm and foundation, and for always having a good intellectual exchange. So as you said, my name is Dr. Aspa Chatziefthimiou. Right now, I'm a conservation ecologist, and the environmental side that I have done most of my work is on the land ecosystems, and now nature has taken me to the intertidal, where we're building a mangrove forest, and the motto is building a mangrove forest with all for all. So I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of EarthNA's Mangrove Restoration Program, but I maintain my love and my affection and my thoughts in the desert. And this is why partly you brought me in to have this discussion. And because the farm is such a big part, not only of the cultural narrative of the country and the region, but because it can be used in so many different ways to enrich the community of humans and wild animals and wild plants, I spend too many hours thinking about the farm and being in farms and around farms. So this is a small introduction of me and my work.
Mr. Fahad, you have been a diplomat, a bureaucrat, an important voice in conversations in food security in Qatar. You're also the founder of the Hinat Salma farm. Could you take some time to introduce us to Fahad Attiyah, the farmer?
Well, thank you very much, and Arshee and Dr. Aspa, for this opportunity to engage and to discuss things that we care about most and are passionate about. The farm itself has been in the family for about 50 years or so. And my father has developed it from scratch. And when he died in 97, he has left quite an estate in terms of not only one farm, but actually several farms, not only in Qatar, but in Saudi Arabia and different parts of the world. And then I mean, so my childhood has always been in and around the farm and engaging with different farms and engaging with different developments around agriculture. And my father's passion to agriculture was quite astonishing because he was a public servant. He was a military leader. He had a full-time occupation at his hands. Nonetheless, he had also this unexplainable passion and love for agriculture. And wherever he went, he always, first, he never lived in the city center all his life. All his homes are on the outskirts of cities, almost rural. And he always had in his, let's say, after work hours, farmers and people who talk about farming or nature. And so that was the environment that I was nurtured in. And Hina Salma was one of those, let's say, childhood settings. And then as time progressed, of course, we all end up following the footsteps of our fathers in one way or the other, inspired by them or for lack of any imagination. But anyhow, we went and engaged in public service from military and also law. And then I was privileged to be tasked with the responsibility of putting together a food security strategy for the country from 2008, 2013. And that role was sort of instrumental in helping me understand the vulnerabilities, the key challenges that we face, and the opportunities that lie out there. And in a way, it made me kind of it allowed me to rekindle those ties with my childhood past and what happened as I grew up in this environment, and understand the strategic value of them, not just a nostalgic one, and the importance of nature, etc. From there, of course, engaged in diplomacy and serving the country in different international forums and representing Qatar as ambassador in both Russia and the UK. Meanwhile, I'm doing my public service. I'm doing also another public service which is not prescribed in my job description, let's say, as a public servant, which is to ensure that there's public good takes place in the built environment, in agriculture, in ecology, in society, in culture, just as a concerned citizen, not necessarily something mandated by anybody, but it's something that I'm charged with emotionally and intellectually. And I thought, well, there's a lot of progress, but there's also a lot of challenges that are born out of it, and we need to have some reflection, contemplation, ability to safeguard what is truly important and valuable, which is the ecological structure that we live in, the food that we produce, the architecture that we fashion, the clothes that we wear, and the creative output of mankind, which should, at the end, serve mankind, not really override or subdue humanity. So that's a roundup of myself and also what I do. And we started a charity in 2018 called Caravan Earth, and Caravan Earth is the one that started Hina Salma, and also our aim is to spread this, what we call alternative paradigm for development in different countries around the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Aspa. Thank you, Fahad. It's really been a privilege to be having these conversations with the both of you over the past few months. And I think with this conversation, what a lot of people would be interested in are these mentions of mangrove forests and agriculture and farmland in Qatar, which really challenges the perception of Qatar as a dry land. I would address this as an open question to the both of you. How do you address this misconception, this built misconception around how arable Qatar's land is, and challenge this idea of Qatar as a desert?
Fahad, I will let you take a stab on this first because it's arable.
Well, Qatar is a desert, and Qatar is dry, and Qatar lacks, many fundamental natural resources. Ultimately, the source of life, water. I mean, it doesn't mean that we don't have water. It means we don't have enough water to have the current load on the natural systems. Hence why the population of Qatar back in the 40s did not exceed 11,000. Had Qatar had a river, or let's say a sustainable natural lake, Qatar would not have waited 10,000 years to develop into a startling metropolis. It would have done so a long time ago, and it would have been a haven of civilization, and to become a metropolis like Damascus or Cairo or Baghdad. But the common denominator between these cities that I mentioned is really water, and that allowed them the opportunities to become the cities that they have been, millennia cities in many ways. And so with the discovery of oil and the importance of that product for the world, and Qatar was endowed and blessed with such a natural resource, of course we had to sort of increase the population by virtue of having these new industries discovered, and by virtue of that more people came, and by virtue of that technology also followed in terms of making water from the sea, which is something that was not accessible to our ancestors in the past. And that in a way transformed the entire trajectory, and it did not change the natural setting. It just allowed people to somewhat manipulate it in a way in order to create the conditions of livability, where people can have access to clean water through desalination. Now, has that changed the natural availability of water? The answer is no. Had that also created an extra burden on the natural resources of the country? The answer is yes. Has that increased vulnerabilities, structural vulnerabilities to the system? The answer is definitely yes. Can we go about mitigating those risks and creating opportunities? Again, the answer is yes. Can it be done sustainably? Yes, it can be. And so we are trying our best to say, well, we're dealing with an existing reality that we believe is not going to change. If any, it will become even bigger and more growth that will take place. But still, the natural ecological load of the country as a whole cannot sustain that number of people and buildings and infrastructure. And that then poses a big challenge, which if we put our collective intellectual brain into it, we can find fantastic opportunities which can be supported by research funds, by projects like Earthner and others, trying to tackle how we can turn a calamity into an opportunity. And that's where the role of Dr. Aspa and many of the scientists and the thinkers, and my background is policy, and that's where I interact with Dr. Aspa, science and policy together, and try to find ways of saying, okay, we're not going to reverse what we have developed here. I mean, it's a reality that we have to reckon with, but how now, given what we know today, that we can make this work and how can we make it work under extreme conditions with all these different potential scenarios that could happen in the future.
Thank you, Fahad. I will start in the same way that Fahad started, that of course, indeed, we are in a desert. And the definition of a desert is not only the low precipitation levels throughout the year, but it's also the degree of how fast this water that falls is evaporated through the soil or transpired by plants. The desert, we have to fight this misconception, and I'm not certain I wish to repeat it, but you posed a direct question. The misconception that the desert is empty. And to make an impression with the school kids that are surprised that I am an ecologist studying nature in Qatar, they're like, there is no nature in Qatar. And I'm like, well, I'll send you my CV, which has increased by 20 pages during my stay in Qatar. So there is a lot of beautiful nature, and the desert is the environment that I miss the most when I'm not lucky to be here. And the desert has a mystique because not everything is apparent to those that do not have the knowledge and the trained eye to see the life in the desert. So a lot of our work, for example, is using traditional ecological knowledge to decipher the activity in any given place through signs of activity, so poop, feathers, etc., or footprints, or trailing footprints that lead to the home of the wild animal. So that's one thing about the desert. And the other thing, the second paradox that I will mention, and I want to mention a third as well, is that we do live in a desert, which is a hyper-arid desert, which means that it receives the least amount of water, and it's before it gets to the levels of rainfall of Atacama, which some of my colleagues call the limit to biological existence. So the only water that this desert, which is between Peru and Chile, receives is through fog, which is a very important source of water for many of the plants here in Qatar and in other deserts. So the other paradox is that we have the land, which is a desert, and it has many ecosystems, yet those ecosystems are not as productive. And then you go to the coastline and you find the mangrove forest. And this is a hotspot of biodiversity. The productivity is humongous. And then you go further, deeper into the sea, and you find seagrass beds. And this is another humongously productive ecosystem. And then you go farther down and you find coral reefs. So it's always a wonderful antithesis, not only in things that we measure as ecologists, but also for the layperson to see the different colors. I always advise the people that I have the pleasure and luck to have with me as co-explorers when I go out to nature, to notice the colors. The colors will tell you a lot about the environment that you're in and how it changes as you travel through it. And finally, the other paradox that exists, which to me is so fascinating, and I can talk about it endlessly, is that, as I said, we are not getting enough water. And for many reasons, mainly because we were not knowledgeable enough to manage this freshwater source in a sustainable way, this has become brackish. So although as a country we're very rich because of the oil and gas industry, in terms of water, we're very poor. But through technological advances, we have desalination. And because Qatar is doing such an amazing job at treating the used water, we are rich in treated sewage effluent. And then this water is amazingly reused. It's a very beautiful circular economy, if you will. This is reused to irrigate crops that are meant for non-human animal use. It's used to irrigate parks. It's used in the cooling systems of buildings. And the water that is stored before it goes out to be used in all these places creates an amazing, wonderful rest stop or residing area for a lot of birds. And the birds, as we all know, indicate that there is a lot of other life around these places. So we can go on and on, but yeah. So there are a lot of paradoxes, and I think from our discussion it becomes already very evident that things are not black and white, and we need plurality in the conversation, as Fahad already said, and through this we can increase the circular economies of all our resources. And to finish this part of the question addressed to me, I want to bring it into the discussion because it's not always understood by a lot of my colleagues that are on the technocratic side of sustainability, that the beginning and the entity that we mimic in sustainability is nature. And nature has a circular economy. So in nature, no waste accumulates. It's being recycled by another organism. And you know who was doing that? Who were the only people that were leading a sustainable life in the desert? Bedouins and nomads. So that's why we have such great respect for them.
Thank you. Something that Dr. Aspa said leads into the next discussion point. And so I'd just like to pick up this phrase where you were talking about traditional ecological knowledge. And the question that I've been thinking of over here, and Fahad, I think it would be a great way for you to illustrate this sort of continuity of the Qatari farm as well, is how has knowledge transmission, this traditional ecological knowledge, taken place in Qatar in the past? And how can we reimagine that for future generations as the farm changes?
Well, a son knows how to be a husband by knowing how his father deals with his mother. The same goes with the daughter. The same goes with any child who the first point of learning is the household. And that's where they get their worldview instilled in them. That's where they get their first basic skill developed before they end up being taken by whatever mainstream education exists in that geography. So the transmission of these practices and these timeless wisdoms happens really from the early days of somebody arriving on this planet. And all that knowledge and wisdom that is encapsulated through the generations is passed on through the parents or the neighborhood. Hence why architecture is very important for me, because it kind of allows for that pollination to take place, just like trees are dependent on mediums, carriers, whether wind or whether other bees and insects to pollinate one another. And so the city itself either allows for such education. I'm talking about everything informal before we even get to sending that child or adult to an educational system. All that informal education that happens in the household, in the street level, in the neighborhood, among the elders and the family members. And it's absolutely invaluable. One cannot just put a price or a tag on it of how important it is. And through that process, that person is therefore equipped with all the values and equipped with all the different necessary skill sets, and then can then take that forward by going and either getting a formal education in the mainstream system, or apprenticing, or taking up a vocation of sort in order for such knowledge to pass on. In the traditional world, most of the skills that knowledge transmission happens through a process of apprenticeship. And so you would, which requires patience and requires discipline and requires a degree of humility. And these are values and traits that people of this region have held for so long, and I hope they will continue to hold it as time progresses. And so the processes by which traditional knowledge is transmitted are somewhat there, but need to be, let's put it that way, protected and fortified for them to continue to survive into the future. And the biggest potential change to them will happen with the built environment. If we build in the built environment in a way that does not allow such symbiotic engagement between the different generations naturally and passively, most importantly, then we will see and witness a gradual demise of this traditional wisdom passing on from one generation to the other. It still exists. The Majlis as a concept is one of those great institutions that society has invented for such traditional knowledge to pass from one generation to the other. And you would go to a Majlis and you will find there's unspoken language of how children are inducted into this tradition without a word being said, through observation and seeing their elders and acting and whatnot. And this is very powerful. The same applies in the realm of women and the men. And so that interplay and role play that goes on between the different, let's say, genders and how they interact with one another and also with the other side is beautiful. But the context as well for which it happens has to be also preserved and maintained for us to continue to be who we are. Else we will be shaped by whatever environment that we invite in from anywhere. And it's important to understand that environments are not neutral, and that they will certainly shape our perceptions of ourselves and of others.
Thank you, Fahad. Before I ask questions, Dr. Aspa, is there anything you would like to contribute to this conversation about traditional ecological knowledge?
Yeah, I like what the last thing that Fahad was saying about the Majlis. I have had the pleasure to be invited by some locals, and I had asked them to bring me in contact with a Bedouin. And unfortunately, I don't speak Arabic. So I could not understand a single word he was saying. But he was so animated. You could tell when the suspense moment was, when the excitement, because we were asking him, about how he was dealing with the elements in the desert. And so he was telling stories about this. And one of the things that I like about the regional culture, the culture of the Arab, is the storytelling element, because it is the reason, funnily and oddly so, that I joined ecology. I didn't join it because I loved nature, which I do immensely. But I joined it because the natural history aspect of my science is storytelling. And there is no better way to transfer knowledge than the storytelling, and there is no better transferring of knowledge than to tell stories about nature. These are the ones that get stuck, because guess what? We are nature, and we are of nature, and whatever you do, you cannot break this bond. You can forget it. If, as Fahad said, if the city is not planned in the right way, you can create discontinuities. You can create breaks in the communication between the different demographics in a city. But if these people, these urbanites, that I call urbanites because most of us are urbanites anymore nowadays, if you bring these people, their guide into nature, this connection is rekindled. It doesn't take years for it to come back. So, yeah, storytelling is just amazing. I don't have enough words to to say more about this.
And I think it really enriches this conversation about what is the future to transmit all of this traditional knowledge to non-farming and now currently urban families. So thank you, Dr. Aspa, so much for that. I'm going to shift track a little bit into discussing another element of resilience that we've spoken a bit about over the past few months. And here, I would just like to start off by asking, Dr. Aspa, you talk a lot about this. You talk a lot about the farm as this resilience-enhancing non-industrial corridor that bridges the natural and the urban. So could you explain a bit more about this sort of space you see the farm to inhabit?
Yes, of course, I'd love to. Let me backtrack a little bit. So the things that a conservation ecologist has in their minds are the 5 threats to biodiversity. And we're all working towards mitigating and avoiding these threats. And the number 1 threat is habitat loss. And some urban planners call this land use change. And so the industries that are responsible for the highest % of habitat loss is the agriculture and the energy production. So the discussion now in the fields of sustainability is about the idea of, wait a minute, why can we not combine energy and food production? So an example, so that you can have a mental image, would be a solar panel farm like we have here in Qatar. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this covers 10 to 20% of our energy demands, depending on the season throughout the year. So if you have a chance to visit, the solar panels are off the ground. So in many countries, what they're doing is that they plant below the solar panels, either crops that will help secure food for the population, Other ecologists go in and plant species that are threatened. So in this way, they help conservation. And that leads to what I have in mind, because I'm a human and I work with humans, but I defend nature. I'm a servant to nature. And this way I'm a servant to biodiversity, and I want to protect biodiversity. So obviously we cannot turn the whole population into ruralites. All the services and bureaucratic systems are concentrated in the urban setting. So let's keep that. Let's keep developing in there. And then let's keep our farms in the peri-urban setting that they are right now. And then beyond that setting, we can have the protected area, so any pristine land that we have. And I will make a note here that Qatar has many, many protected areas that amount to the last reported percent was 24%, and now it has increased. So Qatar will very soon be meeting its commitments for the UN Convention on the Conservation of Biological Diversity. It's the 30 by 30, and I will discuss it again during our podcast, our discussion. So my idea is to create corridors between the urban settings, urban parks, and the peri-urban farms to the pristine protected area.
Fahad, would you like to talk a bit more about how spaces like the Hinat Salma farm, for example, would fit into this vision?
It fits perfectly because that's the kind of, I was talking about it this morning with a group of visitors. The proximity of the farm to the city makes it accessible, number one. So it's kind of like Professor Aspa, there is a cascading sort of effect from the urban, which slightly, our urban structure, I wouldn't say every urban structure in the world, it has this a bit of an antagonism to natural environments, given the roads that we have and the motorways and everything. And so it becomes the first step for them to engage with nature would potentially be a farm before they go into the full scale of nature. And so then it becomes this familiarity with natural systems through these rural farms, and then from there stepping into the wild itself and seeing how this whole interplay with one another, the natural setting or the natural habitats, the farms, and the semi-urban and the urban. We can, I think, have a city meshed with agrarian systems. There has been in history examples of that. Baghdad was one of them. Even Al-Hassa, which is not far away from here, has been sort of a big settlement in comparison to other towns that existed for millennia. And it had meshed both the rural and the urban in a beautiful fashion. And so I think the next model, which I'm happy to collaborate with Dr. Aspa on, is to kind of inform the urbanists of how to not have any urban settlement completely devoid from any natural habitat, and how, as an example, a child's way to school should be through natural environments and ecological environments, and back from school and so on and so forth. We can introduce urban farming, we can introduce sort of zones within the city that are natural and mimic nature's spaces. It doesn't have to be all lush and green, but it can be the rawdas. We can, bring the rawdas back into the city, and then the landscape of the urban meets the natural in a very seamless fashion. The space of ideas is, endless. The question is how to imagine these as real possibilities. And I believe it is possible, and hence why we're doing Hinetsama, basically to show the possibilities, to allow the communities to imagine what it means to ecological stewardship, what it means to environmental governance, what it means when we talk about sustainability. Else these concepts remain abstract and conceptual, and we talk about them, but the people say, which pharmacy should I go to get them issued, because I don't see a corresponding reality to these wonderful statements uttered by us every now and then in every conference. And so we're trying to say, okay, fine, let's try to demonstrate it at the micro level. So I say the Hinetsama farm is a microcosm of an ideal macrocosm that I wish to influence, take shape as time progresses. That's basically how I see the role of the farm playing in the future, is that bottom-up buy-in, okay, from the community, and understanding and education through that symbiotic engagement with an environment like Hinetsama that is regenerative and organic, etc. But also the way the farm allows people to be involved and informed at the decision-making level, so they can, with confidence, say, well, it has worked. Therefore, it's not just, an experiment that will land from outer space that we have no proper reference towards.
Thank you. And this is such an interesting idea of reimagining what the farm looks like. But also when you're talking about this urban-rural continuum and the space, the peri-urban space, as design practitioners, the question really comes up is, how do peri-urban practices like craftsmanship that have always been associated with rural lives, how do they thrive at the farm? And I think at this point, maybe we can talk a little bit about craftspeople and the importance of the farm serving as a place for infrastructure and skills development and skill introduction, really, for craftsmanship.
Okay, if we want to talk about ecology, seriously, we have to talk about the mode of production. The mode of production in the world today is the mode of production that will, I can guarantee that for the listeners, that will annihilate everything, all the ecological legacy that we have, and the future is going to be rather grim. And so our method of salvaging the ecological legacy and heritage that we have is by shifting the mode of production from an industrial capital intensive based system to a craft based system. So it's not an act of nostalgia or sentiment or some kind of emotional attachment to identity. It's really trying to say that the crafts economy is and should be recognized as a viable economic practice that could actually be useful for people's well-being, development, livelihoods, but also one that will preserve and maintain the ecological heritage that we so much depend on and need for our own survival. Else we will bring the calamity and invite calamity upon ourselves by continuing the current industrial extractive mode of production that will actually take us to a point of no return, or until we are faced with existential threats that we cannot mitigate at all. So the farm does not practice or promote craftsmanship just for the sake of craftsmanship, but we promote it to present it as an alternative to industrial modes of production. And incidentally, it also has not only an ecological value, but also a social value where the level of benefit is diffused at a wider base within the community and not concentrated within, let's say, a factory. That doesn't mean that I'm an anti-capitalist, or doesn't mean that we are not in favor of private property, or I'm saying you can make your Boeing in a factory, you can make your routers, you can make your TVs and smartphones and computers and everything, you know, and your ovens, induction ovens, and your refrigerators. So, but 85% of household goods can be made by hand. And if we just shift them back from the industrial mode that they're currently produced in, we will, I guarantee, save nature and save the environments that we live in. Because the industrial mode of production does not sleep and produces 24/7, 365 days a year. Therefore, it has to be in a permanent state of extraction, but we don't have a permanent state of demand. And so therefore we have an oversupply of overproduced things, and then we get people to overbuy and overthrow. And that's the best recipe for complete depletion of everything that is natural and beautiful. And so we're saying that the only way forward is to revitalize the crafts economy as a viable base of production for any country. Hence why we're trying to build this argument through the farm, with the community, and with the different stakeholders that we have in Qatar. And we're trying to spread this also beyond our borders into other countries, especially the African continent, since it's the last bastion before it gets conquered by modern industrial systems.
Dr. Aspa, is there anything you want to add to that before we start talking a bit more about community inclusion?
No, I'm eager to talk about community inclusion.
So, Fahad, what you said at the very end about bringing the community in is, I think, something a lot of places in Qatar struggle with. And again, in our previous conversations, we've had this discussion on the farm as being this sort of stepping stone to nature, this peri-urban space. How do we make programs, and here we're talking about community programming, that turn these farms and these non-urban spaces into more approachable spaces for urban demographics that are very diverse in a country like Qatar? And how do we reinforce these positive experiences and build up to very concrete, very real interactions with craftsmanship and nature?
Are you asking me or Fahad to reply to this?
To the both of you, actually.
So I'll take the lead. I have been interacting with farms a lot, as I've mentioned before, and I always am welcomed at Hinat Salma. It's one of my homes here in Qatar. Of course, they cannot keep me there for too long because I long for the wild nature, but still, it's good to have multiple homes in my home in Qatar. And we have discussions about food security, and we saw the intelligence of the leadership in Qatar when we had the 2017 diplomatic drift, and how resources were allocated immediately, and no one really understood that there was a block in the chain of products coming into Qatar. So there is something to be said about food security in Qatar and connecting to the fertility of the soil and the lack of the rainfall. We know that we cannot be food secure for every single food item that our modern diet desires. We cannot have fruit-bearing trees. We can be self-sufficient for vegetables, etc., etc. So now the question becomes, how can we reimagine the farms, not necessarily as a place of food production to create a food secure nation, but as a place where the community is invited. And by community, again, because I'm an ecologist, as we have strongly established, I don't mean only the human community, but I mean biodiversity. So the reality is And you do not need to have a higher degree to understand it, that the farms are hotspots of biodiversity. When you go to Hinat Salma and any other farm that is not industrially cultivated, you hear bird song, you see lizards, you see all the kept animals free ranging, etc., etc. So this is how a corridor is created to come full circle. How you create corridors between the urban, peri-urban, and pristine land. So what the examples that we have of community engagement are variable in Qatar. Hinat Salma has a lot of educational activities, so they bring in schools. I'm speaking about you, Fahad, right now. So they have foraging opportunities, which I love a lot. And then they have many cultural events. I have been lucky to participate in devising and organizing and partaking in a conference that Fahad was hosting for a team from the UN Convention on combating desertification a couple of years ago. So these are some of the examples that the community is involved in Hinat Salma. And then now we have other exemplars. So there is an amazing dog sanctuary that is operating in a farm. And a lot of the community is going there to volunteer and take care of the dogs and walk them and advertise on social media. So it fast becomes apparent that, as Fahad said, there is, when you identify something as a need, then you are bound to be finding a lot of creative solutions for that need. So if we address this, remove the food security aspect out of the Qatari farm specifically, and introduce non-industrial ways of farming, and instead make space for the community of non-human animals and humans, then it's an amazing win.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing to allow all that other community that Dr. Aspa talks about, which is, the animals, the birds, the pests, the insects, all kinds of biological organisms to flourish without compromising food security, is to make sure that it's all organic and regenerative. Because when you do it in not only an industrial fashion, but also if you do it in a normal fashion where there is pesticides and chemicals and all forms of chemical intervention and industrial processes, and you basically create a disequilibrium in that system. And you can achieve both. And that's what we tried to say at Hinat Salma. You can have the food security dimension, but also the ecological dimension come together hand in hand, and no one should cancel the other or compromise the effectiveness and the need by which one operates with the other. So that is how Hinat Salma looks at things. We look at our aim to achieve food sovereignty, food security, and food safety should not come at the compromise of the ecological equilibrium and the biodiversity needs. And so that appeals to the community in many ways, and that is something that the community does not often see or engage with in the day-to-day life. And the farm, as I said, from day one, we decided to make it open to the public. and that means that we're trying to reduce all the different barriers to allowing people to engage with the ecological system that the farm is, and to develop, like Dr. Aspa mentioned, all the different cultural, social, ecological programs within the farm that that aligns with those values that the community holds. That's the key thing. And so a lot of people are intuitively or value-driven people who want to see good things happening, who want to, and they're imbued with those positive values. But once the environment deprives them from such a thing, it's almost like a flower that goes pale. And the moment it's exposed to sun and radiant sort of environment and water and good soil, it just comes back to life. And so people are very sensitive to authentic experiences, programs that are aimed to kind of be in line with their natural disposition and not against it. And so that's what we're trying to do at the farm, to make sure that we are along the natural disposition of humans, not going against them. Hence the growing ever an increasing community that makes the farm what it is. And so it starts by trying not to look from an ivory tower down at people, but rather look at and try to think as part of member of that community and what the community actually needs by listening and understanding and knowing them. And then your ideas will be born from the womb of the community rather than something that will come from the outside. And that's what we try to do. And I hope that we will continue to do it, and we'll have more people like Dr. Aspa and others and to be partners in this journey for the transformation that we wish to achieve in the community.
So as we sort of move towards the conclusion and coming to a conclusion of the podcast, I wanted to speak to Fahad, the policymaker, and Dr. Aspa, the advisory, on what do you think is a potential roadmap to transform the Qatari farm into all Qatari farms, actually, into spaces that reconnect these highly urban populations to the history of Qatar and the terrain of Qatar. And where do we go from here, really?
Okay, Dr. Aspa, the scientist, can I take a lead on the policy side and see how science responds to that?
We can do, I will let you do that because I respect you, but the science informs policy, so we could do it circularly.
Okay, we do it. Okay, good.
Please
good.
Go ahead.
So we have 1,500 farms, that's it, in Qatar. And so from a policy standpoint, subordinated by science, is to say that every farm will be organic regenerative. We can't afford to have farms doing organic and others doing, it's like saying in a city, or some people can abide by the traffic laws, others, they can just cross red lights. That's basically the analogy that one can put together. And to say, no, we will make sure that every farm in this country, and we'll make the economics work, because that's mostly the first thing that sort of snaps at you, kind of saying, oh, it's not going to work, and that is not true. It will work, it can work. In fact, it will increase productivity, reduce water usage, increase biodiversity, and strengthen the food sovereignty and food security by domesticating that seed production, by making sure that these seeds are resilient to our environments, by imbuing all that regenerative knowledge and practice in the community. And we will have, above all, food that is sort of fortified and full of nutrition We will have environment that is protected and the ecological balance is maintained. We will have food security targets met, and above we will provide our children, our families, our friends with healthy, fortified nutritional food that is not packed with poison and chemicals. And so that is a simple thing that a small country like Qatar can do, and it's within its reach, and we can definitely transform the agricultural sector within 3 years. It takes 2 years to do the conversion. Within 3 years, you can have all 1,500 farms producing help, and that will be a first in the world. And I think small states can afford to do this, and we can be able to make Qatar the first country in the world that entirely produces all of its food needs using organic systems. And it will become a huge PR hit. It will become a very promotional thing for Qatar from the rest of the world. Everyone who cares about the environment, who cares about regenerative farming, which is a big, substantial community. Just to give you perspective, the organic market in the world today stands at $200 billion and growing at double digits. So, and so there is a huge potential for us to even leverage it to serve tourism, to serve other purposes and priorities within the country. The second aspect is to weave the urban environment into rural setting without any substantial loss of habitat. It's just to make sure that our materials that we use in our built environment, the roads, for instance. I mean, I'm a proponent of not using asphalt, but using alternative natural methods, and making the roads even cutting this whole sprawl, urban sprawl that is currently happening in a random fashion, and trying to do conscious and intentional design for the urban setting, and how that interacts with the peri-urban and the natural habitats. So, and not splitting all of that planning between the rural, the semi-rural, and the urban into 3-4 different government agencies, but rather have one that looks at the whole thing in a holistic fashion. And so that's my take of how we can transform things, and it will add a huge social, cultural, ecological, spiritual value, and above all, economic to the country.
Thank you, Fahad. How I'm going to answer this question is I'm going to be a good ecologist and synthesize a few different things. So let me bring in the traditional aspect here. So I'm not certain our listeners are aware of the HIMA system. So this was a system that was being used in the region for agricultural production, either for human consumption or for kept animals. And what they were doing, they were conservationists before the science was birthed, in the sense that they would cultivate part of the land and leave the rest of the land at peace to regenerate in herself. And we see modern day examples of this conservation technique where you allow the nature to self-restore in the national parks in the United States, for example. And they are the best exemplars that I have, at least, in terms of conserving and restoring and managing protected areas. So this is one example that we can mimic, and it ties back to tradition. And then in trying to figure out how to connect urban, peri-urban, and pristine areas, and bring in the community to create a more intimate bond with nature is to use the farm as a stepping stone. So you do that for human diversity. You create different community engagements, like the ones that we have already mentioned. And so they go from the urban setting not to the wild nature that, you know, could feel very scary for someone that has never been out in the elements. So you go softly, you do a soft launch, you want to say, or touchdown in the farm. You start going into the different activities that are carried out in the farm. You see different trees and hear different birds, and then slowly you start feeling like you're part of nature, and then you can go to protected areas that allow human movement, and you behave in a respectful way, not to destroy everything. And then for the biodiversity, the farms can serve as stepping stones, and I'm borrowing this term from ecology, and we use it a lot in conservation and restoration, in trying to understand how to increase connectivity, which in very simple terms means to create corridors, highways for biodiversity to go from one place to the next. And I have been thinking a lot about this, and I'm happy that you're giving me the platform to introduce this idea that everybody knows the 30 by 30, which is protect 30% of your land and 30% of your seas as a country by the year 2030. And this was just discussed, you know, at the high level, and now it's part of the global biodiversity framework. I believe it's target 3. And so what if we agreed that the farms should allocate 30% towards that goal? So you have the farm, you have all operations as you want them, but 30% of the farm is left wild to do whatever she wants. How about that? That would be an amazing dream realized. And guess what? There is a farm, I just found out, and I don't know if many other farms do the same, whereas I'm not certain if it's 30%, but I'm certain that it is desert that is left to care for herself, where they leave this 30%, this area. And you know why? So that the faga, which is the desert truffle, can exist there and come up every year, so that they go and collect it. So they have no other use besides, you know, the faga collection. So when you can imagine that when I heard about this, I was jumping up and down, and I said, you see, the idea that you have in your mind can be and is a reality.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aspa. Thank you so much, Fahad, for what has been an amazing discussion. And there is so much value to be added to design practitioners in Qatar if they begin to consider the local farm as this very urban space of possibility and connection, trying to conceptualize a better future for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Arshee. Thank you, Fahad.
Thank you so much.